don't look at these things in isolation. There may be a bigger
kind of
production.
Interconnectedness. Yeah.
Correct. And so it has been often the case that the anti-money laundering work, not only at Sands, but at other casinos, can look back and have those links, whether it's to drug trafficking or prostitution, because that's often where these large amounts of cash are being generated that they're then trying to wash through a casino.
Human trafficking doesn't always take the form we first imagine. It can be found at almost any level of an organization's supply chain. What can compliance professionals do to assess human trafficking risk, and how can they leverage the resources of the organizations they work for to help root out this tragic problem? Gwen Hassan is here to help. This is Hidden Traffic.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hidden Traffic. This is your host, Gwen Hassan. I'm really excited today to have my friend Matt Frank with me. Matt and I have known each other for many years through different compliance circles, and most recently through MAPI, which is the Manufacturers Alliance for Productivity and Innovation. We both served on the Compliance and Ethics Council for that group and got to work together there. So welcome, Matt. I'm very happy to have you. In your current role, you are Chief Legal Officer at PeopleConnect. Is that right?
That is correct, Gwen. Yes.
Great. Let me know a little bit about what PeopleConnect is, because I don't know. I mean, I know from what I've read on your website, which is that you're a digital identity company, but I'm not sure what that means. So Tell us a little bit about you and your background, please.
Yeah. So let me start with PeopleConnect, where I'm at now. PeopleConnect, as it exists today, was a result of a merger in early 2000 that brought together a number of people search, so online people search brands, along with one of the oldest social networking companies in the world called Classmates, which has been in existence since 1995. So there's some dispute whether it's the oldest or the second oldest. We'll let Wikipedia be the judge of that. So the Classmates business is pretty easy. It's a place where you can find folks that you primarily went to high school with and reconnect with them. You can find, we've got about 450,000 digitized yearbooks on our site. So you can find those.
That's a lot.
So you can both look through them to relive some things, because I think a lot of people have just lost their yearbooks through moves and things like that. You can also get a reprint if you want to replace it, but then you can reconnect with your class or other people that you went to high school with. It's a great tool to organize both in-person and virtual reunions. So you can keep in touch with those folks. Classmates, a little over 70 million users.
That's huge.
It's huge.
70 million. Wow.
Yeah. And that's current, just the current ones. I think it probably goes up to about 100 million, those that have been members at some point in the 30 plus years that Classmates has been around. So, yeah.
Okay, that's helpful.
So that's the easy part of the business, because a lot of people know who Classmates is and how it works. What we also have, which is our largest part of our company, is what we call our people search brands. We have 4 main brands, some of which you may have heard of. One's called Truth Finder, one's called Instant Checkmate, one's called Intellius, and then we have US Search. And these are brands, they're all online at this point, and they compile public records on people. So, it's not to be confused with like an employment screening, background search, or things for like tenant screening. We're not used for that. We're not Fair Credit Reporting Act compliant. So it's just for personal use. But you can use any one of those sites if you want to find a lost family member, an old friend. You can do consumer background search type stuff where you can find people's addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, their public social media accounts, criminal records, civil court records, bankruptcies, property information about them. If they serve on boards of directors, if they own a business, some marriage records, divorce records, stuff like that. So anything that's in the public domain, we work with a lot of different data providers to bring all that together in one simple, easy to read report that's available. Most of it is on a monthly subscription basis. Once you're in, you can search as many folks as you want and find out all sorts of interesting things about people. But you can also see what's out there publicly about yourself. So it can help protect yourself, right? Great example of a good use is let's say, your kids are in a soccer league and other parents drive them around to games and you want to find out what their driving records are like, right? To see if there's anything, like red flag in that. You can find that if it's public information. You move into a new neighborhood, you may want to find out if there are any registered sex offenders that live near you. And then, the typical just trying to find someone who you lost touch with and to be able to reconnect with them. And of course, with all the online dating these days, the ability to go see what's publicly available about that person who you've started to interact with and see if you really want to meet them in person. So
it's kind of, I'm going to summarize here, like a personal due diligence service.
Exactly. Correct.
Right? I think about it in terms of from a business standpoint, if you're vetting the third parties that you're doing business with, this is the same idea, but just on a personal life basis.
Exactly. Yeah. Correct. Okay. Yeah.
So if somebody had, for example, been convicted of human trafficking, that would show up in your background? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we're not Fair Credit Reporting Act compliant is not all of these records are available online. There may be some gaps. You shouldn't use it for that purpose. And we warn folks when they come onto the site that's not supposed to be used for that purpose. But yeah, that is something that you could find if there's something about someone in their background like that, it would show up.
Fascinating. I'm sure that makes for an interesting set of compliance challenges, especially when it comes to things like privacy, right?
And it is, correct.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to come to any one of our sites, whether it's truthfinder.com, instant.checkmate.com, intellius.com, or ussearch.com, you don't even have to be a member in order to request that your information be suppressed. So if you want to come to one of our sites and say, I don't want my information available, all you have to do is let us know and we will make sure that your reports don't show up on our site.
Okay. So the right to be forgotten kind of thing.
Basically, correct. Yeah.
Although that's all very interesting, and it is, the reason that I reached out to you to hopefully talk to you some more specifically about human trafficking because of kind of one of your prior roles, which is, I know before this, you had been serving as the global chief compliance officer for Las Vegas Sands, the large casino hospitality company there. Tell me a little bit about human trafficking in the connection to casinos and hospitality companies. The reason this really sparked my interest right now is because of the recent news story that we've seen. I'm sure you've heard of it as well, this horrible story of a 15-year-old girl who went to attend a Mavericks game with her dad down in Dallas, went to the bathroom and never came back. She was taken from the Mavericks stadium, photographed, listed for sale on a website offering sex with underage girls. She was transferred to Oklahoma, where she was held captive in an extended stay hotel and then trafficked. And I understand that her parents have now sued everyone involved, the Mavericks and the local police, because allegedly the local police there in Dallas told the father that she was likely just a runaway and to go home and to file a report with his local police department, never believing that she could have been, taken from there. And they've also then sued against the hotel, suggesting that there should have been some kind of duty of care on the part of the hotel to notice the arrival of an underage girl and a parade of male visitors in and out of the room. So all of that by background led me to think of you and think, wow, if anybody knows about this kind of thing, it must be Matt. So let's leap off from there. Tell me a bit about what you encountered working for a hospitality company and whether this kind of most recent case is similar to anything that you encountered in your time there.
Yeah. So in Las Vegas, at the time that I was there, it's now changed since those hotels have been sold off to a private equity company. But at the time in Las Vegas, it was the Venetian and the Palazzo. So I think maybe at that time it was close to like 7,000 rooms, hotel rooms.
Wow.
At that complex. Then Las Vegas Sands also had 7 properties in Macau and a massive property in Singapore. So it was an international job. But specifically what you talked about, what goes on in the hospitality setting was something that was top of mind for Las Vegas Sands and had been for a long time. Traditionally, you would think of the prostitutes that may roam the casino floor. And that's something that the company had always, through its security division and the casino employees, always kept an eye on. But one of the focuses when I got there was sort of the broader trafficking focus and just the type of thing that you talked about with that girl who left the Mavericks game and ended up in Oklahoma. So one of the things that we did at Las Vegas Sands was an extensive amount of training with our front desk staff to spot those red flags at the check-in process, with the housekeeping staff, who at least pre-COVID were in the rooms every day, or at least supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And we can get in and talk about that as well, because I think what's gone on in the hospitality world post-COVID may be reducing some of the abilities to spot some of this stuff because of the reduced housekeeping that's going on. So you take the front desk staff, the housekeeping staff. Casinos have great security, right? Not just the boots on the ground, but the surveillance part of it as well. That's a part of the gaming requirements, can really help watch what's going on, not just on the casino floor, but on the floors of the hotels as well, in the elevators, and can spot some of these things. So the training was, as I said, not only the front desk staff, but the housekeeping staff, the security staff, both the on-site as well as the surveillance staff, and really lean into what those red flags are and the things to watch out for. The things of people arriving without a lot of luggage, a lot of entries in and out of the rooms that would indicate some sort of activity going on inside the rooms, the multiple key cards that might be asked for when they check in as a way to facilitate that type of activity. Those are some of the top line things that we really focus the training on, were to be able to spot those types of situations. And then the liaison activities we had with local law enforcement to work with them when those types of things were noticed, to make sure that there was the proper intervention to try to prevent harm.
Yeah, I was talking about this particular case with someone yesterday at dinner who said, yeah, wouldn't you think that the maintenance, the housekeeping services team would have noticed that this girl never left the room, or that they never asked for service, or that, they weren't allowed to come in and clean the room. And I commented, I think the same thing that you did, which is, well, post, in the middle of the COVID weirdness that we're all still in, maybe not. So a lot of hotels, and I haven't been to many in the last couple of years because of COVID, but I was in one last month for my very first conference since COVID, and they had a little sign, like a little tent, a little paper tent next to the phone that said, due to COVID, we are not cleaning rooms on a daily basis. We will clean rooms every, third day if your stay extends beyond those 3 days. And one of my first thoughts was, that is likely increasing human trafficking risk. And I wonder if hotels have thought about that kind of payoff there.
Yeah, I don't know. I think some of it, initially was a health-related issue of just reducing the amount of contact between the housekeeping staff and guests.
Okay.
But I think now it's probably more of a labor shortage-driven issue, the inability to have full staff. And I think that's probably now translating into, if they want to call it efficiency or savings gains, they can reduce their costs. So I think all of that is moving. And I think you're right, Gwen. I think that is a key part of the tools that may be disappearing now because of, the post-COVID world that we do live in now.
Yeah. Your point about staffing shortages is a great one, Matt, because that also leads itself to another kind of human trafficking risk, which is the supply chain risk, right?
Exactly. Right. So for Sands, that was sort of the second part of our focus, and not so much in the US, but let's say in Singapore, where the vast majority of housekeeping staff were guest workers from other places in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And so the big risk there, in our view, were what we would call these labor brokers, who would essentially...
Do they recruit?
They would recruit locals. And the hard part is that, in essence, their fees in order to get someone to Singapore to take these jobs, not with Sands, because we really did a great job in vetting those agencies that would bring us workers. But you could basically have like an indentured servitude type of issue where essentially these young women mostly could be living in very tough living conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So much of their salary, let's say, was going to their lodging. In fact, there could be some debts of their parents that were involved here that
become like impossible to ever pay back, those kind of things.
Exactly. And these young women are basically, I don't want to say forced, but basically coerced to work out of their home countries. And that money then going, through those brokers, taking very high fees, holding passports. That's one of the big issues, right? That gets more into like the quasi-slavery type of issue, which is another part of the whole trafficking issue outside of the prostitution angle.
Yeah, we've seen even a couple cases of that here in the U.S. There was a hotel, I won't name which one, down in Miami that somebody it was a newspaper, did an investigation and tracked their housekeeping services team back to an offshore labor recruiter and found that these people were living, I believe, in an abandoned shipping container. A whole group of them with no running water and no electricity, in order to provide these housekeeping services to a major hotel chain in Miami. So even though I know your kind of exposure to it involved overseas hotels, I think we can find it right here in the US too, unfortunately. What are some of the best practices you've seen in both areas? I mean, you mentioned as it comes to kind of the guest side, using video surveillance and training. What about on kind of the supply chain side? Is it just a matter of doing diligence? Should companies be never using a labor recruiter? Or what do you think are some of the best ways to kind of detect and prevent those things from seeping into a hospitality company's supply chain?
Yeah, so there's two parts of that, Gwen, right? One is the front end. So it's the due diligence of the vendors that you choose to work with, right? But second is the audit side. It's requiring the audits of those vendors to make sure that they're not engaging in the practices that have been identified that could be leading to the exploitation of these workers. And a part of it as well is making it very clear to these workers that you can report these types of things, as it was to Sands, and informing them of their rights when they began to work for Sands, whether it was directly or through some sort of contract. So these folks knew what their rights were and could report information to us that we could then look into, whether it was their living conditions, any sort of indentured servitude type situation that their families may be experiencing, which has led to them having go to Singapore or Macau for those types of jobs. Then the second part of the supply chain side is, let's say, you're doing large construction projects. And Sands, at the time that I was there, was doing major work in Macau, had to bring in labor. Correct. So that whole part of it as well is making sure the subcontractors that you're bringing in were not exploiting those workers and making sure that their living conditions were adequate, that wage laws were being adhered to. I experienced quite of this in the 5 years I was with Johnson Controls, as a part of those international projects that Johnson Controls was involved in, the large building projects and things like that, which did involve the subcontractors, some of which would supply job site labor in places like Dubai and Saudi Arabia, India, to make sure that those standards were being communicated and then were being enforced as well.
I love that you brought up that part of the business too, because I talk with people pretty frequently now about human trafficking prevention. And more often than not, I talk to people who are in companies and they say things like, well, we're not importing chocolate or we're not manufacturing clothing. So I don't think we have any risk. Our human trafficking risk, forced labor risk is zero. And you've just pointed out, 3 different areas where a business that you wouldn't typically think would have human trafficking risk definitely has it. In building of new facilities, which every company does at some point or another, in housing people from a hospitality standpoint, and then from a maintenance standpoint. Most companies have some kind of maintenance services, whether that's a ground crew, whether that's housekeeping staff, whether it's custodial services, all of which are areas that are very high risk for forced labor. So great perspective, Matt. Thank you so much for talking with us today. Any kind of final thoughts or other stories you want to add? Yeah.
Well, I think one of the interesting things, at least about the time I was with Sands, with casino business, is the interaction that the human trafficking risk can make with other compliance issues, let's say on the anti-money laundering part, right? So if, let's say, there is a ring out there that's involved in the human trafficking in the prostitution world in connection with the casino business, they have to find a way to launder the money. And a casino is a great way to do it. Lots of cash floating around. So there was a big emphasis when I was at Sands that don't look at these things in isolation. There may be a bigger production
interconnectedness. Yeah.
Correct. And so it has been often the case that the anti-money laundering work, not only at Sands, but at other casinos, can look back and have those links, whether it's to drug trafficking or prostitution, because that's often where these large amounts of cash are being generated that they're then trying to wash through a casino.
Interesting. I have talked to somebody else recently who pointed out that if you're looking at human trafficking in terms of like a Venn diagram, it is actually a smaller circle inside of the larger circle that is just entitled corruption. Right. And that you can't have human trafficking without corruption, that it does not occur absent corruption in many forms, whether that's bribery, whether that's money laundering, to your point, that there is an inherent need and overlap for both if you're going to engage in something like human trafficking. So good point.
And just to add to that, one of the things as well is you can imagine that, when a lot of third parties may be involved in the whole arranging of the big fish or the whale gamblers to come to your casinos, you don't know what they're offering to those guests that's sort of outside of what you would be involved in. So again, that third party due diligence on those gaming agents that all the casinos use to just make very clear that there aren't those side extras that are being included, because a lot of times these bigger fish gamblers will get a lot of the comps, whether it's the free rooms and those types of things. So if there's a big party coming in with access to lots of rooms because of their status, you really have to watch what those keys, those room keys, are being used for. And again, part of the whole surveillance system that Las Vegas Sands had was very important to make sure that that side activity was not happening.
Fascinating. It always makes me think, I have maintained for a long time that if you want to have a truly interesting cocktail party, you would only invite compliance professionals, security professionals, or HR professionals, because they have the best stories of any group of professionals anywhere. There's so much of an overlap between the three. It makes for really interesting discussions. In any case, thank you very much for your time today, Matt. I really appreciate your sharing your perspectives. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. If people wanted to get in touch with you to ask more questions about your background or about kind of this issue in the gaming and hospitality industry, how would people reach you?
I think the best way to do it is through LinkedIn. Just send me a message on LinkedIn. Matthew Frank is how I'm listed there currently with PeopleConnect. You should be able to find me. I'd love to hear from folks. And see what they have to say, and would certainly be willing to lend some expertise if that's what they need.
Great. Thank you again. Thanks so much
Great.
for talking with me.